In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how we can integrate framework Vue in Vite project. So I have already scaffolded the default Vite project. So let's start development server by running npm run dev. And by the way, while scaffolding new Vite project, there is a special command that we can use, which will basically scaffold Vite project with Vue framework already integrated. But just to better understand this whole process and to see what is going on under the hood, we're going to do this manually. And the first thing we need to do is, of course, install all necessary npm dependencies, such as framework Vue itself and Vite plugin, which will allow us to convert files with an extension .vue into JavaScript code. So after installing both of these dependencies, we need to open up Vite configuration file, vite.config.js, and in here, we have to include that plugin we have just installed, plugin Vue, into this array by calling this function Vue. And then let's just remove everything from the main.js file and start writing Vue component. So inside of our index.html file, we already have an element with an ID of app. This will be an element where we're going to mount our Vue application. So firstly, we're going to create the root component, app.vue, and for demonstration purposes, we're going to use a very basic example of a counter component. So I'm going to create here one reactive variable by running function ref. This variable is going to store current value of our counter, and inside the template of this component, let's add h1 element with a text counter, and right under, we're going to add a button which will allow us to increment count variable. So let's also output the value of the count variable in here and register click listener on this button, which will basically increment count variable like this. So now that we have one Vue component, we need to initialize Vue application in our main script. So in here, firstly, let's import our root component from the file app.vue, and also we'll need to import function createApp from the Vue package, which is going to be used to initialize our Vue application. And in here, let's call this function createApp, passing our root component, and then calling function mount and specifying an identifier of that element where we're going to mount our application into. And just as a reminder, we already have an element with an ID of app in our index.html. So now in the browser, as we can see, we have a working counter, so our Vue application was properly initialized. And now let's take a look at the transformation which Vite has applied to our app component. I have additionally installed plugin called Vite plugin inspect in order to see what transformation Vite applies to our modules. So we can open up this URL in the browser, and in here we're going to see all those transformations done to our modules. So whenever we are importing app.vue component, Vite plugin is going to take the content of this component and turn all this content into valid JavaScript code. In other words, into the render function, which will be called on the client side and render our component on the page. And now let's also take a look on the network tab. So when browser fetches main.js, then it fires a call to the server to fetch the content of the app.vue component. But instead of giving us the raw content of the app.vue component, Vite has applied the plugin to the file with this .vue extension, which would transform Vue template into valid JavaScript syntax. And this is the code which is responsible for rendering counter component on the page. So as we can see, it was very easy to integrate Vue framework into Vite project. Initially, we just had to install two npm dependencies, Vue framework itself, and Vite plugin to transform .vue files into JavaScript code. And then we had to include this plugin inside of Vite configuration file, just like any other Vite plugin. And after doing all these steps, we have actually provided the full support of the Vue framework inside Vite project. So we can develop Vue application in a normal way by creating components with .vue extensions, importing those components, they will be properly transformed into valid JavaScript code, and everything will be working fine. And this is how we integrate Vue framework in Vite projects.